Hi, Captain Peter Custy again with another of my online briefings, the 737. Today we're going to look at an area that a lot of pilots don't get to see because of the intensity of studying and training for an initial course. Uh, Instructors should really bring up these two chapters in the back of the QRH at the very beginning of the course so that student pilots will better understand how to act on the flight deck, what to say and when to say it, and how to do things. Very important. So what we're looking at here are the checklist instructions for normal checklists. Chapters in the back of the QRH. Normal checklists are used after doing all respective procedural items. The Boeing concept is to do procedures by memory and then follow the procedures by a checklist. Now, both pilots visually verify that each item is in the needed configuration or that step is done. This is very important as both pilots. Pilot monitoring is the person who normally does the checklist. On the ground, we're talking about in flight also, the pilot monitoring is the person that does the checklists. The little chart you see below here is applicable to a lot of airlines or air carriers that use Boeing equipment. However, there is a slight modification that many carriers use, and I'll talk about it here, in that the before takeoff checklist is normally called by the captain, not necessarily the pilot who's going to be the pilot flying. Some carriers utilize this sequence in that they have a taxi tiller on both sides of the flight deck. And the first officer may be the person that's taxiing in that case, and maybe the person that will be doing the takeoff. In that case, the captain would actually do the checklist. But for all intents purposes for my briefing today, I think most carriers have only one tiller on the flight deck, and the captain will always be the pilot flying when on the ground. All right, let's have a look at the different checklists. We have different procedures when you get onto an airplane, and we'll talk about that later on electrical power up in another video. But basically, you put power on the airplane unless it's already established. You make sure the AC transfer bus off lights and the source off lights and the standby emergency lights. Those lights are off, indicating that you have power on the main buses. If you don't have power on the main buses, you establish power by doing a cold airplane check. It can be called. There are basically 6 items that are done from the supplemental procedures called electrical power up. And that is the first statement in the first paragraph under normal procedures in the FCOM when studying. You'll see that at the very top of the page. So you may have to refer to the supplemental procedures. You may do supplemental procedures by memory if your SOPs state so. Now, once you are powered up, then you have a preliminary pre-flight procedure to be done. It's done by memory. And the Boeing concept is left to right, top to bottom. So it's fairly easy to follow in the flow. The next procedure is the person who is going to do the CDU pre-flight will sit in the seat and get right into doing the CDU pre-flight. It's a procedure done by memory, and it's outlined in the FCOM, and we'll have a look at it later in something that I designed called 30 minutes to pushback, where I give trigger points of when to do what, following the FCOM precisely the way Boeing have laid it out, but in a much easier way with trigger points, when to do what. So we'll look at that in a future video called 30 minutes to push back. All right, once the CDU pre-flight has been done, then the pilot sitting in the seat will do his or her respective pre-flight. When the captain sits in his or her seat, he will do his pre-flight. Now, for the purpose of these briefings, when I say him or his, I am also definitely ensuring that that would be her or her. So pardon me if I say him all the time. It's for just ease of briefing. In any case, once the pre-flight procedure has been done by both pilots, then doing the rudder pedal adjustment, seat belts, shoulder harness is an indication that that pilot has finished their respective pre-flight procedure. It's telling the other pilot that I'm ready. So when both pilots have done their seat belts, that means to the other pilot that they have completed their pre-flight procedure, and that's when the captain would call for the first checklist called the pre-flight checklist. If you notice on this chart, in the column of verify, regardless of who is moving the switch, and normally on the ground it's the first officer that's doing the checklist and ensuring that the switch or control is in the correct position, the other pilot must verify also that this has been done. And that's why I've outlined it here. It's so important. Many years ago, when I started flying, we didn't have areas of responsibility associated. Both pilots were totally responsible for everything that was done on the airplane. You work as a team. You're one, basically. It's like the auto pressurization system on the 737. You have one backup standing by as a backup. Likewise, pilots are working together as a team. You work as one. Therefore, both pilots are checking that everything has been done. And as time went on in aviation, we realized that checklists were important and that both pilots must always check what's happening on board the airplane. So that's why I've highlighted it here. Pre-flight checklist, before start checklist, before taxi checklist, before takeoff checklists are called for by the captain. The after takeoff, descent, approach, and landing checklists are called by the pilot flying, which could be the first officer or the captain. Once landing, the landing checklist, shutdown checklist, and the secure checklist is called for by the captain. The big thing in checklists also, one of the big things here, and I'm going to highlight it, is if the airplane configuration does not agree with the needed configuration, you stop the checklist. So you've done the procedure by memory, you've called for the checklist is being read, and the person who is reading it, we're talking whether it's in flight or on the ground, is ensuring that the control or switch or lever is in the correct position. But the other person, the pilot flying, will absolutely ensure that this is completed. So if the configuration does not agree, you stop the checklist. You complete the respective procedure. Okay? You complete the respective procedure steps and then continue the checklist. If it becomes apparent that an entire procedure was not done, stop the checklist, complete the entire procedure, which is by memory, and then do the checklist from the start. Try to do checklists before or after high workload times. The crew may need to stop a checklist for a short time to do other tasks. If the interruption is short, continue the checklist with the next step. If a pilot is not sure where the checklist was stopped, do the checklist from the start. If the checklist is stopped for a long time, also do the checklist from the start. After completion of each checklist, the pilot reading the checklist calls, let's say, before start checklist complete, or before take off checklist complete. Now that brings the pilot flying into the picture that everything has been done. Checklist content. The checklist has the minimum items needed to operate the airplane safely. Normal checklists have items that meet any of the following criteria. Items essential to safety of the flight that are not monitored by an alerting system. Or items essential to safety of the flight that are monitored by an alerting system, but if not done would likely result in a catastrophic event if the alerting system fails. Or items needed to meet regulatory requirements, or items needed to maintain fleet commonality, or items that enhance safety of the flight that are not monitored by an alerting system, for example, the auto brake. Or during shutdown and secure, items that could result in injury to personnel or damage to equipment if not done. Lastly, the checklist construction. When a checklist challenge does not end with switch or lever, then the challenge refers to system status. For example, landing gear down refers to the status of the landing gear, not just the position of the lever. When a checklist challenge ends with switch or lever, then the challenge refers to the position of the switch or lever. For example, engine start levers, cutoff refers to the position of the levers. Because normal checklists are done routinely, some checklist items are simplified to be more conversational, such as auto brake, RTO. Easier to say than auto brake, select switch, RTO. So what we've just discussed in the past few minutes are normal checklists, how to handle normal checklists. I'll end this video now, and the next video that will follow will be how to read and conduct yourself on the flight deck in using the non-normal checklist. All right, that's it, the end of this video. If you would like an online briefing with your partner, get zoomed up and get ready, and contact me with the information that's on the screen. I'll gladly give you a pre-briefing to your briefing, especially if you're taking an initial course. And free of charge, I love aviation, and I want to share my experiences with you. I thank you.